Hello everyone, welcome to a new CAMNES studio video. In this video we are going to talk about mummies. Before getting into details, I would like to inform you that in this video I'm going to show you a series of pictures with mummies, with human remains, mummified human remains. So this is just a disclaimer for all of you, especially those who are particularly sensitive on this topic. So I would like to start this video with one of the most famous cases of misinformation concerning mummies, which is the case of the unlucky mummy. This mummy, this pseudo-mummy, is considered to be the cause of the wreck of the Titanic, because according to the myth, this mummy was on the Titanic when the Titanic went down. There are two main problems, two main issues with this myth. First of all, this pseudo-mummy, this unlucky mummy, was not on the Titanic when it went down. It was at the British Museum. Second of all, this unlucky mummy is not a mummy. It is actually a mummy board. So it is a wooden board. These kind of boards were employed especially during the Third Intermediate period as a sort of cover over the mummies. They were usually placed between the mummy and the coffin lid, and they were employed as a sort of protection for the mummy itself. They were used basically as a sort of funerary mask. Think about, for instance, the funerary mask of Tutankhamun, but of course they covered the whole length of the body. They were usually made of wood, and they were usually in the shape of the deceased, so they have a human shape. They were anthropomorphic. But this mummy board, which has all these characteristics, actually is not a mummy. It is not a body. It is in the shape of a body, but it is not a mummy. So this story, I believe, is quite eloquent and helps us to have a better idea of how we perceive mummies. Mummies for us are usually associated with corpses, are usually associated with mystery, with negative stuff related to ancient Egypt. But why? Why so much interest in mummies? This interest probably dates back to the years of the Egyptomania, when Egyptomania actually exploded, so during the 19th century. In fact, mummy mania, which is basically the growing interest in mummies, is one of the facets of the Egyptomania, which is in fact particularly the profound love for ancient Egypt, for everything that is related to ancient Egypt, in particular the Egyptian style, which in fact influenced, especially starting from the 19th century, the contemporary style, the style of contemporary cultures, especially in the Western world. So mummy mania, as mentioned, is one of the different aspects that compose Egyptomania. And this interest, this curiosity for mummies took different forms. For instance, during the 19th century, we have the mummy parties. So shows, people used to pay a ticket to attend these shows, and during these shows, basically, people attend the unwrapping of the mummies. As you can imagine, a lot of damages were caused by this unwrapping, a lot of damages because of the fact that the body of the mummies got in contact with air without the bandages that actually protected the body itself. And so, of course, these mummies suffered a lot of issue, a lot of damages, also because this kind of wrappings didn't happen only on the occasion of mummy parties, so on the occasion of these shows, but also for scientific reasons, for anthropological studies, for Egyptological studies. Of course, this kind of unwrapping was partially different because of the reasons behind the act of unwrapping those mummies, but the effects were basically the same. And so unfortunately, we have lost a lot of information, of pieces of information, because of this custom of unwrapping mummies. But mummies were considered as something extremely interesting, something that people were curious about. And because of this interest, during the 19th century, people also wanted to have pictures with mummies. And in fact, a lot of photographic studios arranged sets, like they created sets that somehow recalled ancient Egypt. So, for instance, they put little statuettes of sphinxes, plants, papyrus plants, coffins. A lot of people wanted photos with coffins, with coffin lids, for instance. And of course, among all these objects that were part of the sets, of the photographic sets of these studios, there were also mummies, which might be fake or real mummies. Unfortunately, mummies, even before the 19th century, might also be intentionally destroyed to create, for instance, the mummy brown, which was a color that was employed by painters, or to create the so-called mummia, which was a sort of drug, sort of medication that was believed to be a sort of cure for every kind of illness, every kind of issue. So we have just had a sort of general overview of how modern societies, especially in the Western world, so-called Western world, perceived mummies a few years ago, a couple of centuries ago. But what about ancient times? Mummies, of course, were perceived in a complete different ways in ancient Egypt. Mummies were not considered as something for entertainment, but they were strictly related to Egyptian religion. Actually, there were different kinds of mummification processes, because the ancient Egyptian time, the ancient Egyptian history covered a lot of centuries. And of course, also style, also techniques changed in the mummification process during the course of the time. And therefore, the mummies that were created in the Old Kingdom were different from the ones created, for instance, during the New Kingdom. According to Herodotus, actually, there were also some differences depending on financial means of the deceased, of the family who paid the mummification process for the deceased. There were at least 3 different mummification processes based on these financial means. There was a cheaper process which did not include the evisceration, so did not include the removal of the internal organs, and then different steps, different processes, other processes which were of course much more expensive, until reaching the level of mummification that was usually reserved only for pharaohs or members of the royal family. These different kinds of mummification processes might, however, sum up in 3 different steps, even if, as mentioned, it is not possible to describe a classic, a typical mummification process because of the different processes that they had during ancient Egyptian times and because of financial means. But we might say that usually the mummification process was composed of 3 main steps. The first one was the eventual evisceration, so the eventual removal of the internal organs. These organs were put within the so-called canopic jars, and these jars were used as a sort of protection for those internal organs. Of course, the organs were removed to avoid the decay of the body, and then these part of the body that were removed from the body itself were placed within these vases, the canopic jars. As mentioned, however, in some cases, the internal organs were left within the body, or in other cases, they were removed, treated, and then placed again within the body. Of course, on the occasion of these kind of processes, so when the internal organs remained within the body or were treated and then placed again within the body, the canopic jars were useless. They were not employed to store these organs. But nonetheless, in some cases, they were still employed as part of the funerary equipment. So they were still placed in the tombs because of their symbolic value, rather than the fact that they were actually useful. They were not, of course, at that time. After this eventual evisceration, the body was placed within the natron. So the natron was a salt that was used to dry the corpse, to dry the body out. And sometimes sunken areas of the body were then filled out with linen or other materials to obtain a shape that was similar to a living body. Then there's the third step. And in this third step, we have the wrapping of the body. So, of course, the use of bandages, and the use also of amulets and objects, small objects, precious objects, which usually were placed among the different layers of these bandages. Sometimes, at the end of this process, a funerary mask was placed over the face of the deceased, or in other cases, some details were actually painted right on the bandages, like eyes, nose, mouth, and so on. But why did ancient Egyptians want to maintain the body intact? Because according to Egyptian religion, that is something fundamental, something mandatory. According to the Egyptian religion, there was a part of the spirit of the deceased that stayed on earth and needed the body as a sort of safe place, as a sort of something to come back to. And therefore, it was compulsory that this body stayed intact, potentially for the eternity. According to the Egyptian religion, there was a part of the individual, a part of the deceased that reached the afterlife, that maintained a sort of contact, a sort of relationship with the part that stayed on earth. But if the body of the deceased was, for whichever reasons, destroyed, also the part of the spirit that stayed on earth was destroyed. And due to this link to the part of the spirit of the deceased that was in the afterlife, also the part of the deceased that was in the afterlife was destroyed too. And therefore, the deceased was damned, was condemned to the eternal nothingness, which was the biggest fear for the ancient Egyptian civilization. So we had a look at how mummies were perceived in modern times, in ancient times. What about now? What are mummies for us now? Recently has been proposed to modify the way in which we called the mummies, especially in museum contexts. And it has been proposed to start using the expression mummified bodies rather than mummies, because of the necessity to underline, to highlight from the very beginning the fact that while we are looking at a mummy, we are actually looking at a body. We are looking at a corpse of a person who lived in the past, someone who was alive in the past. Due to the fact that in many occasions, we saw that in the first part of the video, mummies were actually treated as objects, as mere objects. Now there's the necessity to underline the fact that mummies are not objects. They are not vases. They are not statuettes. They are bodies that belonged to people, someone who in the past was alive. So we would like to hear from you. What do you think about this aspect of mummies? Do you think that this new possible expression, like mummified body, might help the perception that we have of the mummies? Do you think that it is a good thing that mummies are on display in museums, or otherwise perhaps you would prefer that mummies were actually stored somewhere like storerooms? What do you think? If you want, you can write your comments in the comment sections, or if you prefer, you can send us an email at ask@camnes.org. Thank you so much.
Hi guys, if you want to discover more about archaeology and our ancient past from a different perspective, make sure to click on the CAMNES logo here below. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you will never miss an episode and join the archaeological community in search of the truth.